China's involvement in Africa undermines human rights. China is enabling African authoritarianism. China fails to stop racism against Africans over COVID-19. Some media, especially Western ones, are saying so. So, when the West talks about human rights issues, what are they talking about? They talk about democracy and freedom. But for a country, at its core, it should mean a nation and its people have the freedom to decide their own development path and political system without any external interference or intervention. Historically, Western countries have subjected Africa to centuries of brutal colonial rule and blatant racial discrimination. Even to this day, some Western countries continue to interfere in the internal affairs of African countries through financial, legal, sanction-based, and even military actions. In contrast, China adheres strictly to the principle of non-interference in other countries' internal matters, and China speaks for the rights of Africans at the UN.
要纠正非洲遭遇的历史不公，首先就要旗帜鲜明地反对殖民主义遗毒和各种霸权主义行径。西方国家应当真正承担起历史责任，改弦更张，停止外部干涉、施压制裁等错误手段和做法，将非洲的未来交回非洲人民手中。
Africa's understanding of human rights and democracy is shaped by its unique historical context. For many African nations, the focus lies in safeguarding national independence, ensuring collective rights, promoting national development, and improving the living standards of their people. This perspective drives African countries to prioritize cooperation and development as means to achieve social progress, which is exactly aligned with China's developmental concept. Let's talk about job opportunities. Back in 2021, when asked about how the U.S. viewed China's growing influence in Africa, the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken implied that you should be looking hard at whether, when other countries come in to build a big infrastructure project, are they bringing their own workers with them, or are they giving jobs to people in the country where they're making investments? By the end of 2020, direct investment of Chinese companies in Africa had exceeded $43 billion. China has established over 3,500 companies of various types across the continent. Private enterprises have increasingly become the primary investment force in Africa, with over 80% of their employees being locals. These companies have directly and indirectly created millions of jobs. Let's talk about living standards. Some Western countries criticize others for failing to benefit African people. But how do they themselves treat Africans? During the rampant spread of the COVID-19 pandemic, Western countries hoarded vaccines and even wasted some. Data indicates that by the end of 2021, Western countries had stockpiled as many as 600 million unused doses of COVID-19 vaccines, with close to 1 billion doses set to expire in a few months. Meanwhile, at that time, only 5% of adults in Africa had been vaccinated. Many African countries that were in urgent need had no access to Western vaccines. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa once harshly criticized this, saying, "The greed that they demonstrated is something that is quite disappointing indeed, particularly when they say they are our partners." China has consistently offered substantial assistance to Africa in the fight against COVID-19. By December 2021, China had delivered over 180 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines to 53 African countries and the African Union Commission. Additionally, China had dispatched about 23,000 medical personnel to over 40 African countries, providing treatment to around 230 million patients during the past decades.
Donc, si la Chine, qui a aussi été dominée un moment, elle, dans son approche, met de côté ces aspects et vient traiter avec humilité, mais voulez-vous que les Africains refusent cela?
As we see for the last 15 years, China has been the largest trading partner with Africa. So as China's economy improves, we also expect benefits within the African countries because if we are cooperating with China, we are looking at industrial development, we are looking at infrastructure development.
The list goes on and on. But to sum it up, they talked a lot and did little and slandered those who were truly there to help Africa. Western countries' support for the protection of human rights in Africa should not be about imposing their own will, but rather be based on Africa's understanding and needs. At the end of the day, it is African people who have the final say on whether China is violating human rights in Africa or not. China has consistently respected the choices of the African people, and the results of China-Africa cooperation are visible and tangible. China has never been the so-called human rights underminer, but rather a steadfast defender of human rights.